Thanks for joining me for this fourth Sunday of Epiphany and the last last day of January. Our sermon today is based on the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. Jesus and his disciples went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I struggled to begin this sermon because there is so much in this short gospel, but also because I kept focusing on the exorcism. And the truth is, I know very little about exorcism. I remember in seminary that our professor pointed out that exorcism is included in our book of occasional services. And when I looked it up, I found it contained 3 paragraphs on the subject and refers the priests to their bishop. And the rest of what I know is from watching movies like The Exorcist that I saw when I was 13 years old and far too young to see it. I hid behind the seat with my best friend after the first 10 minutes with my fingers in my ears. As I said, I know very little about exorcism. At the same time, we cannot deny that Jesus performed them and had authority over unclean spirits, and that he gave this authority to his disciples, which is where we find Jesus today in the first chapter of Mark's Gospel. And as Lutheran pastor and professor David Luce points out, the first things tend to set the tone for much of what is to come. And commentators have noticed how the first scenes of each of the 4 Gospels offer a preview of the evangelist's insight into Jesus. In Matthew, Jesus climbs a mountain to teach and interpret the law like Moses. In Luke, Jesus announces that the Lord has sent him to proclaim the good news, release, and healing, a message that exemplifies his ministry even as it is met with rejection. And in John, the first thing Jesus does is multiply wine and blessing at Cana, living into the grace upon grace promised in the prologue. So what does the first thing tell us about Jesus according to Mark's story? That he comes to oppose the forces of evil, defined not generically, but rather as anything and everything that robs God's children of life. And what does that mean? Does that mean demon possession? I don't know. Maybe. Does it mean a first century understanding of mental illness or seizures? Perhaps. All of this seems strange to most of us, at least to me. Most of us like to think the idea of unclean spirits is an archaic idea or a misunderstanding of science. Maybe. But then, when we translate this idea of unclean spirit into today's world, think of the unclean spirit of racism that causes us to see those different from us as less than. Or the unclean spirit of conspiracy theories and falsehoods that social media and other outlets spread that have caused divisions and blind us from seeing our brothers and sisters as children of God. Or the unclean spirit, as David Luce puts it, the increased devotion to the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I, that measures all things in terms of how it affects me and only me rather than the broader community. You may not, yes, we may not be comfortable with the notion of an unclean spirit, and yet they abound. So, the idea of unclean spirits or evil may not be so foreign, and we may find it very close to home. In fact, if you look closely at what Mark said in this story, you see just how close. Verse 23 says, there in the synagogue. You see, the man with the demon or unclean spirit was not out there. He was in the synagogue. He was at the synagogue on the Sabbath, like all good Jews, just like all of us are here today in Zoom church. This man was not out there. He was in here with us. I have found several good definitions of unclean spirits or demons this week. One, that which is one is that which is opposed to the world as God would have it be. And another is the forces of evil which would rob the children of God and of all that God hopes and intends for them. That would rob the children of God of all that God hopes and intends for them. When I hear these definitions, I can say that I am possessed by things that are not of God, things that are less than what God intends for me. For example, I cling to those things that possess me because I know them. And even when I know they're not good for me, I still cling to them. For example, a fear of looking foolish that keeps me from speaking up. My struggle with sweets and junk food, or hanging on to old grudges, which still sting when I turn my attention towards them. Fear of not having enough money to pay bills or to retire. You get the point. Too often in the church, we identify the evil as out there and the good as in here. The great Russian novelist and ardent Orthodox Christian Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that the line between good and evil does not go between countries or empires or religions or political systems. The line between good and evil goes right down the middle of every human heart. And that's where Jesus and the authority that everyone recognized that day in the synagogue comes from. You see, Jesus comes to remove the demons, the unclean spirits from all of us. Jesus came to attack that line that goes down the middle of our hearts. And sometimes, perhaps like the man in the synagogue, we often wish the holy would leave us alone to live lives of selfishness and materialism and leave us alone with our addictions. But as we hear the story, it was the demons that recognized Jesus as the Holy One of God. Maybe that is what sometimes keeps us away from church or want to deny God's existence. When the man in the back of the synagogue yells out in the middle of Jesus' sermon, and Jesus recognizing the demons that possessed him, Jesus didn't ignore him and wait for the ushers to come and take him out with a plan to tend to him later. No, Jesus went straight to him and healed him. Even though the man wasn't capable at the time of asking for help, Jesus came anyway, right there, right then. And God is here right now. Reach out. Let Jesus in. When addiction wants to take control and you are so tired of fighting it and you want to give in to it, let Jesus into your darkness. When the grudge you hold leaves you seething again and again, God is here. When you can't stop yourself from letting the want of more money rule your life, Jesus is here. And whatever possesses you that takes away all your joy and makes you want to hide in shame, Jesus is right there telling the demons to come out and healing your broken heart. He says, "Be gone." And he will say it over and over as long as you need to hear it. Jesus is saying, you don't have to live like this. I will be with you every step of the way. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, said, "Where is God in all that possesses me? In my depression, my addiction, my disease, in my loss, in my grief, in my sorrow, in my own attraction to other gods?" I can only say to you that God is here. In your belief, your doubt, your disappointment, and despair, God is here. God is out there too, not to judge us, but to heal us and to help us be with others and help with their healing so that no one is left in the darkness alone with their demons. Today, when I read the Gospel of Mark, I see so clearly why Mark was so eager to share the good news that Jesus has come to oppose anything, and Jesus is a force to be reckoned with, that keeps the children of God from all that God hopes and desires for us, so that we may know the joy and purpose for which we were created. But when we look back at the Gospel of Mark today, we may also ask why, if Jesus came to cast out unclean spirits and if people received his authoritative teaching and life-giving action with amazement, then why is the world still the way it is? Jesus established God's kingdom and gave his disciple power over unclean spirits. And today, that is us. We are his disciples. And the unclean spirits that possessed us or possess us and seem to have hold of our world may seem to be too big and too overwhelming. Systemic racism, polarized worldviews that cause us to demonize each other, environmental disregard and degradation, selfishness, fear, and violence. I could go on and on. And I know I can't solve all of these big problems, and probably you can't either. But that day in the synagogue, Jesus didn't exorcise all the unclean spirits in the world. No, that day he liberated one man. He made a difference for one man and gave him a new life. So we may not be able to change the whole world either, but maybe we can make a difference in one life so that we and they may know the joy and purpose for which we were created. So thank you for joining me today. And if you would like to join us for next Sunday's service, just message me and I will send you the link and you can be part of the whole service. Also, we have evening prayer on Wednesdays at 5:30 on Facebook Live. And if you have any comments or questions or prayer requests, please post them in the link in the messages and so I can pray for you and love to have a discussion with you. So may God's blessings be upon you all and the peace of the Lord be always with you.